Okay, so picture this. You're a public servant in India, maybe a high-ranking official, right? And you get hit with accusations of some serious financial crime, money laundering, something big.
Sounds intense.
It is, but here's the twist. Before anyone can even think about taking you to court, they need permission.
Permission from who?
From the very government you work for.
Whoa, that's a bit of a catch-22, isn't it?
Exactly. And that's the situation in India right now after this huge Supreme Court ruling about the Prevention of Money Laundering Act. We usually just call it the PMLA.
The PMLA, yeah, I've heard of that. Pretty powerful piece of legislation, right?
It is. And that's what makes this ruling so fascinating. We're going to deep dive into it today, try to unpack all the legal complexities, and by the end, you'll understand why this decision is sending shockwaves through India.
Looking forward to it.
So let's start with the basics. What exactly is the PMLA?
Well, think of it as India's main weapon against all these complex financial crimes. Money laundering, of course. Hiding illegal cash.
Yeah.
Stuff like that. Even activities that could fund terrorism. It gives a ton of power to the Enforcement Directorate to go after these cases.
The ED? Right.
Yep, the ED. They investigate, they prosecute, the whole 9 yards.
So they're basically like financial detectives, but with actual bite.
Exactly. They can seize assets, freeze bank accounts, even arrest suspects. They have a lot of authority under the PMLA.
Powerful stuff. But how does all of this tie into needing government permission to actually prosecute someone?
Right, so that's where things get interesting. India also has this thing called the Code of Criminal Procedure, or CRPC, and tucked away in there is a provision specifically for public servants.
Public servants meaning government officials.
Exactly, and this provision basically says that you need to get permission from the government before you can prosecute one of their own.
Hold on, so before you can even take a government official to court, you need the government's okay.
Yep, you got it. At least for actions they took while doing their job.
Why is that? Seems a little strange.
Think of it as a kind of safeguard. This provision is meant to protect public servants from, frivolous or malicious lawsuits.
So they don't have to be constantly looking over their shoulder, worried about getting sued for every decision they make.
Precisely. It's about making sure the system functions smoothly. Can you imagine the chaos if any random person could just drag a public servant into court without any kind of filter?
Yeah, that would probably create a whole lot of problems.
Exactly. This provision tries to prevent that. It ensures a certain level of order and stability in the system. And, to be fair, there are exceptions.
Like what?
Well, in cases of really serious offenses, things like gender-based violence or sexual offenses, you don't need that prior sanction.
So in those situations, the law recognizes that swift action is crucial.
Exactly. It shows how the law tries to balance various interests. Protection for public servants, yes, but also the need to address serious crimes effectively.
Definitely a lot of nuance there. Okay, so we've got the PMLA on one side, all about fighting financial crime, and the CRPC on the other, with its safeguards for public servants. So how do they clash? How does this all come together in the Supreme Court case?
Well, it boils down to how the PMLA interacts with other laws.
Right.
See, on the one hand, the PMLA actually says that a lot of the provisions from the CRPC, like the one we discussed, generally apply to money laundering cases too.
So they work together.
Kind of. But here's the catch. The PMLA also has this clause that says, if there's ever a conflict between the PMLA and any other law, the PMLA wins. It overrides everything else.
So it's a bit of a legal showdown, right?
Right.
Which law takes precedence?
Exactly. And that's the million-dollar question the Supreme Court had to wrestle with.
Okay, so set the scene for us. What happened?
All right, so the Enforcement Directorate, the ED, they're investigating this case, right? And they run into this public servant who they believe is involved in some shady financial dealings. But the ED, they're feeling pretty confident. They're like, hey, we've got the PMLA on our side. We don't need anyone's permission to prosecute. This law trumps everything else.
So they're basically saying CRPC, Schormer PC, right? We have the power.
Pretty much. But of course, it wasn't that simple. The case goes all the way up to the Supreme Court, and that's where things get really interesting.
So what did the Supreme Court say?
Well, they took a long, hard look at everything, and ultimately they sided with the CRPC. They said, hold on. Requiring government sanction to prosecute a public servant doesn't actually conflict with the goals of the PMLA.
So you can have both.
Right. The court basically said that if the PMLA always wins, no matter what, then the provision that brings in parts of the CRPC becomes pointless.
Which wouldn't make any logical sense.
Exactly. So they decided that both laws can coexist. You can have a strong law like the PMLA to combat financial crime, but you still need to respect the safeguards in the CRPC.
So even in these super complex financial crime cases, the basic principles of due process, like protecting public servants from just being randomly prosecuted, still matter.
Absolutely. And that's a huge win for the rule of law in India. This ruling is a reminder that even the most powerful agencies have to operate within the boundaries of the law. It's a check on the ED's power.
A check on their power. But what about the flip side? Are there any potential downsides to this?
Well, yeah, some people argue that requiring this government sanction could slow down investigations, especially in cases where time is really crucial.
I can see that. Bureaucracy can be a real drag sometimes.
Exactly. And in the world of financial crime, things move fast. Evidence can disappear, money can be moved across borders in the blink of an eye.
So requiring this extra step could potentially hinder the ED's ability to act quickly and decisively.
That's the argument, at least. It's a valid concern, for sure.
It sounds like we've got a real balancing act here. On the one hand, we want to make sure the government can effectively combat financial crime. But on the other hand, we don't want to give anyone, even the ED, a blank check to just run roughshod over people's rights.
Couldn't have said it better myself. This case perfectly highlights that tension that exists in any legal system. How do you balance effective law enforcement with protecting individual rights?
It's a tough question, for sure. There are no easy answers. But I think this case gives us a lot to think about, and it'll be interesting to see how this all plays out in the future. What other situations might this tension arise in?
Right. Lots to ponder.
Lots to ponder indeed.